Hey, Aharon Rabinowitz here. Have you ever wanted to create the look of hot glowing metal like this in Cinema 4D? Well, in this tutorial, I'll show you how. Okay, so let's get ourselves set up for our project. Let's go into the render settings right here and choose Redshift as the renderer. And then once you've done that, the Redshift menu becomes available and you can click on that and choose RS Render View. And this will give us the view that shows our renders as we're working. And I'm going to drop this right here alongside this like that. And then I'm also going to open up the asset browser. And this is the asset browser that shows all the cool stuff that comes with Cinema 4D. I'm going to move this down to the bottom. This rarely works the way I want it to, so I'm going to drop it right here. And then I'm going to disconnect it again. I'm just going to undock it, and I'm going to try it one more time. And I'm going to go just to the bottom one right here. You can see there's a little bit of a move there. I'm going to take this right there, drop that there, and then I'll drag it up, and that's perfect. It's worth noting that if you want to save your layout, all you have to do is click on this plus button and choose Save Layout As, or if you like this as your startup layout, you could change this to your startup layout. That's up to you. I've saved this. I've got this one called Browser, and it sets things up perfectly. So I can go from the standard one to the browser, and it's all ready to go. Also, remember to turn on the IPR. This shuts itself off every time you change layouts, and we're going to want to see the things we're working on in here updating over here. Now, in this project, I am going to be working with a sword, and, I like to work at scale if possible in Cinema 4D because some of the more procedural effects, whether it's displacement or one of the ones we're using today called curvature, they really take size into account. So what I would say is this: let's try to get ourselves to the size of a sword, at least as our base. And how big is a sword? Well, I don't know. I went to Google and I looked for it, and it says 45 to 80 centimeters. You can go a little bit bigger if you want, but I'm going to use that information, and I'm going to create a platform to hold the sword. And so I'll choose cylinder, and for the cylinder radius, I'm going to choose 90, maybe. We'll start with that and see if that works. And we're also going to lower down the height a bit, and we're going to zoom in here just a little bit, and we're going to just make some more changes, get some more rotation segments on it. I wouldn't mind getting a cap on there, so let's put in a cap and fillet it, or fillet it. I don't know the right word. That's already looking pretty good. Well, we can give another segment like that, and yeah, I think that's looking pretty good for what I want. And then I'm going to import the sword that I downloaded from Sketchfab. It's right here. It's free, and you can download this. You can find your own sword or even model your own sword. So grabbing hold of the model, I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to hold down Shift while I do it. This will bring the model into the current project. And from here, I'll just click OK. And we can't see the sword because it's very, very tiny. So I'm going to scale that up quite a bit until I can see it. Also move it up here a little bit, so you can see it's really small. We want to scale this up a lot. And something else I want to do is I'd like to have it laying flat on this cylinder. So I would naturally reach towards my place tool, which I will do here. But as you can see, it's doing it right based on the bottom of it. So I'll change this to, let's try X and see if that works. Nope. We'll try Z, and that will lay that out. I can rotate that on there, and I can also just make it a little smaller, and I think that looks pretty good. Although if we get in on the side here and we take a look, it doesn't really feel like the sword is resting on the thing, because while part of it is touching right here at the base of it, the sword as a whole is not sort of laying on this surface the way I might want that to do if I were trying to show something real. So what I'm going to do is, and it's just for a quick fix, is I'm going to choose tags, and I'm going to choose bullet tags. I'm going to choose rigid body for the sword. And for the cylinder, I'm going to choose tags, bullet tags, and we'll go with collider body. And then I'm going to let the simulation run, and the sword just falls. So now if we look here like this, it's actually laying there the way it should. And if I delete this tag, the sword is now placed. And since I don't need the dynamics in here anymore, I'm going to delete that. There's other ways to do that as well. That one just seems to work, and it's fast. So now the sword is placed, and we're ready to move on. Next, I feel like we should get some lighting set up. So let me quickly add in a dome light. And what I'll do is I'm going to go into my browser here, and I'm going to select Media. And from here, I can see I've got a section called HDRIs. And I'm going to go down to the bottom here and just grab this one, ZBrush Interior Barcelona Church. And I'm going to drag this onto my texture. Now, you can find tons of free HDRIs all over the internet. You don't need to necessarily use the ones from Cinema 4D, but it's nice to have them in here so you can get yourself set up. Then once I've added this in, let me just go over to here and just turn off the background. I don't need to see it in the background, but you can see the lighting is really much more interesting, and we're going to get some shiny spots on the metal when we add it, but here's before and here's after, so looking much better. Next, I'm going to add some materials to the scene. Now, I'm not going to create these materials from scratch. I'm going to use some materials from outside of Cinema 4D. Now, I've got obviously materials in here. If we go over to materials right here in the browser and we look at, let's say, glass or fabrics or metals or any of the stuff that's here, there are materials. These just don't happen to be right for what I want to do in this one. So I've got a library of additional Redshift materials, and you can get free Redshift materials online. There's these right here, and at Motion Squared, there's this stuff on this website, and there's some really cool liquids on this one on waldemarart.com. And then also there's some paid ones here on Redshift Materials, and I happen to be a big fan of the pixellab.net, and they've got a lot of cool materials. There's a big collection of Redshift materials, whether they're terrains or metals or really cool stuff. So I'm going to use stuff from this collection, and you can use whatever you want. So moving into my material collection here, let's get into my Redshift material pack, and I'm going to go with the ground stuff here, and I can try with this one right here just for this base. I don't know if I like that one or not, but what I need to do first is select this and just change the projection. I'm just going to go with cubic, and that works. And if I wanted to try maybe something different, let's say go over here maybe to stone, maybe I wanted something a little bit different, I could try applying this right on top of this one so it keeps the mapping, and you know what, that's the one I'm going to use. Okay, next I want to add some metal to our sword, so I'm just going to go up into my imperfect materials collection, which is available from the pixellab.net, and I'm going to grab hold of the metal here, and I'm going to just drag that onto the sword right like this. And I can see the projection's not great. I'm just going to change that projection from spherical. I'll switch that over to cubic, and that'll do the job. Again, there are so many materials out there to choose from. You can get free ones and there's paid ones, but for this lesson I'm using them to save us some time, because the real crux of this lesson is going to be about the glowing heated metal thing, and we're going to get to that right now, and that's where this tutorial is going to come in handy. So I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to jump into it right here. Just, you can see it, it's a basic material. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to come down right here in the weight for the color. I'm going to turn all the way off, turn to black. I'm going to turn the weight of the reflection down to 0 so it doesn't have any reflection. And then I'm going to come down to the emission, and I'm going to set the emission color to a really intense orange. And I'm going to set the weight of that orange up to 2 for now. We're probably going to play with this later, but this creates a glowing material. And then I'm just going to drop this right on top of our sword. And we're done. See? Glowing hot metal. Okay, maybe not. But let's do some stuff to this material to help it blend in and work with the rest of this sword. So I'm going to double click on this material right here. And I'm going to choose to add in a ramp. Right? Double click on that. That adds in the ramp. And I'm going to apply that right to the opacity. So you can see it fades off from full opacity to no opacity. And what we're going to do is, right away, we're already getting something good because it's giving us this look. But I'm going to select the sphere here, and I'm going to change it from spherical mapping again. I'm going to change it to flat. And I'm going to work in texture mode, making sure that this is on right here. And I'm going to scale down this right here like this. And just moving the point right there. So we're getting like the glow on the front of this sword, and it kind of fades off. I can even just bring this a little bit further up. Maybe scale that back a little bit too. Yeah, and I think that's pretty good. Now we need to find a way to let the metal on the edges and the dirt and all of that kind of show above this. So we're going to create another material, or rather we're going to duplicate a material. So we have this metal. I'm going to hold down Control, Command on a Mac, and drag it. And with the duplicate material created, I'm going to double click. And you may notice that this is the shader graph and not the node graph. Depends on the material and how it's set up. This one is using the shader graph. You could convert it, but I don't think we need to for this tutorial. What I do want to show you is if I right click on this right here, I can choose a different kind of object. And I'm going to set this one to object. And now we can see a shape that's got more than just a sphere to it. So we'll be able to use this to look at the way different materials interact with different shapes. So I'm going to go right here and type in curv, and I'm going to pull out a curvature node. And I'm going to take this node and I'm going to drag it right onto the redshift material. And over here, by where it says overall, I'm going to choose opacity color. And we can see that in certain areas we're now seeing the metal, but other areas we're not. And it's based on the areas of curvature. If you're working in the node editor, it's a little bit different. First off, I'm going to right click over here and I'm going to choose object from the pull down right here. It's at the very bottom in this case. And then I'm going to go into here and I'll choose plus, and I'm going to type curve, curv anyway. I'm going to grab a curvature node and I'm going to just drag this right onto the opacity. It's right there. And that creates the curvature effect here. Now before we go any further, let's take a look at another example of curvature. I wanted to do that because this model's got a lot of detail in the surface and it's really going to help us see how curvature affects the material. So I'm just going to grab hold of this redshift copper material, which is part of the redshift mutating materials library from the pixellab.net, and I'm just going to drag it onto the object. And once I've done that, I'm going to select this and just choose, instead of spherical, I'm going to go with cubic for now. And I think that's looking good enough for what we're going to do. Now, the next thing I want to do is add another material on top of it. I can just grab, doesn't really matter, this one's looking nice. Let's drop it right on top. And what we're seeing is that now it's been taken over by this copper material. So I want to double click and jump into the copper material right here. And again, we're just going to add in another curvature node. So let me just type in curve, drop this in, and we're going to drop it right here onto the redshift material. And we're going to choose overall opacity color, and that will do the job. Look at how the detail is now being brought out by this curvature material. So we're seeing the copper, but only in the area with the most curvature. So if I jump back into that and I select the curvature node, here, let's move this like this. Let's try playing with like the contrast, which will lower it up so we can make the contrast higher and we can get more of this copper. I could also try here playing with the minimum right here, and you can see that we're getting something that looks really awesome. And that's actually doing a good job approximating what happens to a copper statue as it oxidizes and gets a little more damage over time. By the way, I got this model from 3dscans.com. This is ahead of St. John the Baptist on a platter, and you can download this for free. They've got a lot of cool free stuff there, so check it out. Okay, so jumping back to our original project, I'm going to drag this material that we created with the curvature node, I'm going to drag it right on top of our sword. And you can see that it's using the areas of most curvature to create these lines, but it's not like that other statue, so we're not getting quite the level of detail that we were getting before. And you know what, we're not going to be able to get too much out of it, but it's enough if we make a couple of little changes to it. So let's jump into the material and see what we can do here. I'm going to make sure that I have my curvature node selected. I'm going to move this all the way to the side just so that we're working with the controls here and we can see what's going on in the IPR so that we can see how it's affecting the material. As you can see again, without the kind of curvature we had before, there's only so much we're going to be able to get, but we don't need quite that level of detail. So I'm going to change this mode from convex to convex ale curvature. And at first it's going to seem like it's going to get rid of a lot of that detail, but we're going to bring it back with different settings. I'm going to go down to the bottom here. And I'm going to click on clamp enable and clamp expand. And I'm going to bring this number down, and that brings back a lot of the detail. I'm also going to bring the minimum over here up, and that's also going to bring back a bunch of detail. Make it a little dark though, but I think it'll get us to a good place to start with. Okay, so we see a lot of detail coming back into this. Then I'm going to move over to the contrast and lower that down, which kind of smooths it all out, kind of makes it just a little bit lighter, and it takes away some of the impact of what we've done. I'm also going to change the radius from 0.5 to 1, which spreads out the effect a little more. And then I'm going to bring the minimum up here a little bit and bring down the maximum quite a bit. And I think we've got some nice detail that's coming out here in the various edges and the curvatures. Finally, just because in case we want to pull close up, I want it to look good, I'm going to select the material right here, and I'm going to make sure that it's set to cubic, which it is, so that's great. You know, all of these settings, whether it's the projection settings right here or any of these, it's going to depend tremendously on what your project is and what your model is and whatnot. So just know that what I'm trying to do is show you how this works in general, but when you bring your model in, it's going to be very different. I mean, you can see that when I applied our curvature node to the copper material earlier, it had an instant effect, but in this particular object, it's not quite as pronounced. So that's what you're going to have to contend with when you're working with this effect. Okay, next I'm going to duplicate this material, control drag, and it duplicates it. I'm going to double click to bring myself into it. And instead of using a curvature node for the opacity, I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to choose noise. And then from that, max on noise, drop that right there. I'll drop this right onto the redshift material, and when it asks me what I want to do, I'll choose overall opacity color. And then in the noise, I'm just going to go with blistered turbulence. And before we can really make any other changes, let's just see how this looks when I apply it. So let me drop it onto our sword. And now let's just make some changes. Let's try going into the overall scale, maybe making that 0.1, makes it a lot smaller. And then we can try things like the low clip and the high clip. Tighten things up. I don't think I like high clip there. Leave that alone. Bring up the brightness and lower the contrast. And so it's got like this sort of like dirty impurity on top of it. And if we take a look at this now, I think it's looking pretty good. Yeah. It's definitely looking like it's got some damage and it's been heated. And now we just need to make it glow. So I've got a redshift camera in here. I'm just going to delete it. We can start from scratch on that. Let me click on this redshift camera button, and with the camera selected and I'm in it now, I'm just going to go over to the lens effects and I'm going to turn on bloom. I'll set it to override, and I'm going to bring its intensity up to 200, and I'm going to bring its threshold almost all the way down. We're not going to see anything yet. I've got to go back to this material. And what I'll do is, going down to the emission, I'll set this glowing material. Let's give it an emission of 5 and see what happens there. Okay, so we're getting more glow. Can set this up even higher. Why don't we set it to 10 and go back to the camera. And again, I'm just going to maybe even lower this threshold down a little bit more. That's looking really nice. Bring it back to 1.5. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, looks pretty good. I'm happy with this. And just so you can see how vastly different the effect can be depending on the material and the object to which you apply it, let me just drop in that sculpture that we were looking at before. And I'm going to place this right here. Let me turn off the sword. And I'm going to take these materials and I'm going to control drag them over to the sculpture, to the little bust right here. And you can see that we've got our work cut out for us to make this material work with this object. But once you nail it, it does look pretty good. Of course, I always like to take my renders and bring them into After Effects for color grading and different kinds of effects for the final look. As always, I hope that this helps you in your work. Once again, I'm Aharon Rabinowitz. Thanks for watching.